What paranormal experience convinced you that ghosts are real? Never really believed and not sure if I still do, but there were some odd happenings at the movie theater I worked at in college. One theater in particular was super weird. Every time something malfunctioned or generally strange happened during the day, it was always in that one. But more importantly, I was cleaning it by myself one morning and it was completely empty, but heard a human-like groan 6 feet in front of me. Heard it again, same exact voice and sound, a few months later, but this time in the break room, and it was even louder and closer. Cut my break short and ran, lol. Then he did shit like slapped a popcorn scooper off the machine to the floor, and one time my table was shoved really hard while I was working at it. Nobody was around, and nothing could have fallen on it. Some events can be explained as logical happenings, but not those. Not sure what to think other than it's strange, and might as well play along that it's a ghost, lol. Despite the occasional spookiness, the job was fun. It was only on very quiet, very slow days he'd make an appearance, but most days we were busy. It was always when you'd least expect him. I'd spend long late night shifts until 2 a.m., almost completely by myself in some halls and theaters, totally creeped and ready for a show, and I get nothing. It was always like in the mornings or afternoons, when I'm minding my business, he decides to groan at me. I was camping with my husband and his family at a small, remote lake in our state. Our state, New Mexico, has always had many stories of paranormal activity just about everywhere. Well, on this camping trip, there were about 10 of us off the shore of the lake and one other group of people camping, maybe like 6 of them, at the next site over off the shore. It was nighttime, and both our group and the other were doing typical activities, making s'mores, having a few drinks, telling stories, when all of a sudden we all heard what sounded like a little girl yelling out for help. The other group of campers asked us if we had any children in the group. We didn't. Neither did they. But we were all positive we were hearing a little girl and decided to search the area we heard noises from together. Rather quickly, we found something. There was a field behind our campsites, and we all saw a very tall, pure white figure standing maybe 100 feet away from us in the field, making the noises. We all agreed that this thing looked maybe 6 feet tall, skinny, and white as can be. Everyone got quiet, but we were all together still and made our way closer to investigate. Whatever it was that we saw started backing off as we got closer until it disappeared beyond some trees. Every single person in both campsites was freaked out by this, and that night while we tried to sleep, we continued to hear those little girl calling for help sounds. It gives me chills to think back on this. Around 1 p.m., me and my brother were at a grocery store and we bumped into one of his friends from high school. They greeted each other and made some small talk. I also said hi since we were schoolmates. That night, around 8 p.m., my brother received a call that his friend, who was in a coma for 12 hours, just died. He thought he was receiving a prank call since we just met the guy 7 hours earlier. The day my grandpa died, my grandma asked me to stay the night because she didn't want to be alone. It was a very hard day for everyone, especially her. I didn't have much knowledge of ghosts or paranormal because I was 13, and I never got into that stuff until later. I go in the guest bedroom and get ready for bed. As I'm laying down trying to sleep, I get sad thinking about the day we just had and how much I was going to miss him. I said a prayer and ended it with, "I love you, Papa. Good night." 1 second later, I hear his distinct voice say, "Good night." I leap out of bed and run into the living room, turn on the lights and TV, and just sat there trying to figure out what just happened. A few hours later, my grandma came out and I told her what happened. She started to cry and sat with me the rest of the night. I was en route home from a 12-day vacation, driving a pickup pulling a fifth-wheel RV. It was around 11 p.m. on a Saturday night in late July, and I was about 2 hours from home, trying to make it home yet that night. I was in a very rural area, where there was almost no one living on about a 20-mile stretch of road. There was only one combination gas station, tavern, motel on here, and it's heavily wooded on both sides. It is county maintained and fenced at the tree line. The shallow ditches had been mowed and the grass was about 6 inches high. I only saw a couple of cars on this whole stretch of road. I was going only about 50 miles per hour because it is heavily populated with deer. I saw movement ahead, so I immediately slowed more. As I passed, I saw it was a young woman, tall, fit, brunette, wearing a cropped top, pleated skirt, and stockings, walking with the traffic just off of the shoulder. I immediately thought car trouble, though I had not passed a disabled car, or fight with boyfriend or driver and was put out. I pulled to the side of the road, hit the emergency flashers, and grabbed the flashlight to check on her. When I got to the rear of the camper, there was no one. I looked around for her. There was no way she could have reached the back of the RV before I did, so she could not have been hiding there. She could not have hid in the ditches as the grass was too short. She could not have made it to and over the fence without a light in a little time it took me to get to the rear of the RV. I looked where she had been walking, and I saw no sign that the dew on the grass had been disturbed. I drove the rest of the way home with the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. When I stayed at my aunt's house for a night, I slept in a room that had all the furniture of my great-grandmother who passed away a few years prior, including the couch I slept on. At night, I woke up to the room being freezing cold, despite no opened windows, doors, and the heating unit of the house working very well. Suddenly, I heard loud noises in the dark, and when I turned on the light, I saw my great-grandma's old sewing machine working on its own before it very slowly stopped and seized movements of its compartments completely, after which I calmed down, feeling cozy, and fell back asleep. To this day, my aunt and parents don't believe me. I was in a minor car accident, T-boned at an intersection. About 100 meters before I hit the intersection, I felt a hand on my shoulder and a male tell me to slow down. I was already a few kilometers under the speed limit doing 55 in a 60 zone. I was in the car with my then 3.5-year-old daughter. She was on the passenger side in the rear and would not have been able to touch me through her restraints. Other car hit me at high speed in the front passenger side. If I'd been going any faster, my daughter would have taken the impact and not survived. A few days later, my very healthy and uninjured daughter was battling in her bedroom. I went to check on her, and she told me she was just talking to Grandpa K. I asked where he was, and she pointed to the corner of her room. I figured it was just her imagination and walked away. About a week after that, she was at my mom's house and said, not verbatim, "Hey Grandma, Sonny says to say hi. He is sorry he left, but he's looking after Mom for you." Grandpa K is Mom's dad. He died before I was born, and Mom never really mentioned him or her mom, also dead before I was born when I was growing up. Grandpa K's nickname was Sonny. I didn't even know that until that moment. My boyfriend and I were in our house eating dinner. Our front door was open and the screen door was closed. We heard the screen doors swing open and slam shut. We both went to the living room, then out onto the front porch. As soon as we went outside, we were hit by a thick, cloying, floral, sweet smell. It smelled like funeral flowers, if you've ever smelled that scent before, just overwhelmingly strong and concentrated right in front of our house. We both felt kind of creeped out, so we went back into the house and to our bedroom. I sat on the edge of our bed, which faced the hallway, and one of our dogs came and hopped onto my lap. My boyfriend and I were speculating about what the door slamming and the smell was all about. I was looking straight ahead into the hall during a lull in the conversation, and I saw a dark shadow pass down the hall, go past our bedroom door, and into another room at the end of the hall. It was just tall, vaguely human-shaped and solid black, like the area where it was somehow just had all the light sucked out of it and you couldn't see through it. Our dog saw it too. He went nuts, barking and growling and whining. For some reason, that scared me more than anything, that he saw it too. I started crying and said I wanted to leave the house, so we got our dogs in the car and left. We were having plumbing problems anyway, so we ended up just staying in a hotel room that night. When we came back the next day, things seemed totally normal, and nothing like that has happened since. Definitely one of the spookiest things I've ever experienced. I was at a friend's place, a very old wooden high-set house. Previous to this, he told me that it was haunted. Drawers would open and close, cupboards would open and slam shut, etc., etc. I called bullshit, as I'd never experienced this myself, until one night, after playing WoW for too many hours and eating too much pizza, I decided to sleep in his lounge room, as he had a futon. I heard shoes walking from right to left, slowly. They were ladies' shoes, much like the traditional witches' shoes, with the big single brass buckle on the front. They walked slowly from right to left into the kitchen, paced around and walked back from left to right. I can still hear the steps to this day. They were heavy. There was also a scuff like the heel hit too low before the foot was placed down every other step. There were only the two of us in the house, and he was asleep in his room. I shat bricks and told him the next day. He said he heard it as well, and it's common. A few weeks later, He said that all the doors and drawers were opening and slamming shut, like something was losing its mind in the kitchen. After that, a mirror flew off the wall in the second bathroom and shattered on the floor, and everything immediately fell deadly silent. He never had any issues after that mirror smashed on the floor. This is my mother's story, and it's more about communicating with the deceased rather than seeing. So she's at work one day, office job, and she needs to make a phone call to pay an invoice or something. So she calls the company and starts speaking to a man. She suddenly gets the urge to interrupt him and say, "Sorry, but you have put the wallpaper up in your bathroom yet?" The guy hangs up immediately. She's feeling a bit weird about it until he calls back and tells her that his wife recently passed away unexpectedly. Prior to her death, she had been bugging him to finish the wallpaper in the bathroom. It really shocked both of them, but she felt like he was happy to get the message, even if it was another nag. Used to have a delivery route, third shift. Part of my route had me passing through a national forest. The first few weeks going through this forest had the hairs on my arms standing up. It was in the first week that one day I stopped to get gas at the town just before going into the forest. I never walked away from the car, used my card to pump, blah blah. But as soon as I get to the forest, I feel like something is in the car with me, in the back seat. I didn't see anything though, the rear view mirror, and I was petrified of turning around, but I knew what it looked like all the same. To sum it up, an old lady with a face similar to a scream mask with the long, stringy gray hair. After a few weeks, I came to peace with whatever the fuck is guarding the forest. Basically told it that I respect the forest, I'm not here to tear things up, litter, whatever. Months later, I'm being sent off to other areas to fill in. I'm friends with the guy that took over my route, and one night we're both talking before the routes were set out to load up, and I asked him if anything had ever joined him on the route. He knew exactly what I was talking about, knew it was the national forest, something in the back seat, only his was some jackal-headed creature, not an old lady. Later, I asked someone else that used to have the route if they had seen strange things, again in the forest. It got to be amusing, since if I filled in on that route or anything, I never had problems anymore on that stretch. I used to see other weird things out there though, mostly weird lights. One night, I thought there was a police car somewhere until I realized the forest was too dense in this area for a car to be in there. There were weird flashing blue lights. There's camping areas out there, but not on that main road. I usually don't discuss this much because people try to explain things away, but they weren't there. I saw what I saw. When I was in college and studying at home, I remember needing to find a particular old 17th century play called The Alchemist by Ben Jonson. Me being poor and stupid, I didn't buy the class textbook, so I had to find it on my own. I was at my desk, and behind me was a walk-in closet which I used as a library, as I collected old and rare books. I remember thinking that I saw the play in an old anthology of literature that I owned, and quickly pushed that out of my mind, as I thought it would take too much effort for text that was surely available on Project Gutenberg online. I heard a loud thump behind me. I turned around in my chair and walked into the closet, and on the floor was a book turned open with the pages facing up. You have to understand, for this to truly sink in, that my closet was lined with shelves that extended far enough back that no part of my books were hanging over the edge. I was meticulous and careful with them as some were relics. I looked at the book in disbelief, and when I saw that it was the anthology of literature I was thinking of, and not only that, but the header of the page showed it was the page of the play The Alchemist, I knew this was something truly out of the ordinary and unexplainable. I have more experiences in this house, but this one will remain for me as irrefutable proof that something intelligent that understood my inner thoughts caused that to happen. In the same house, on the day my father died, my grandma also tells a story of how pictures in the house were flying off the walls at her. My dad hated her guts, and she's always been an honest person. I don't know if I'd call what happened to me an experience with a ghost necessarily, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Back in college, I was walking through a historical district of my city. It was a double date, me, my best bud, and two girls. It was like 9 p.m. and we were strolling. In the district, there's an old historic hotel that was built in the early 1800s. Me and my bud were leading the way, and the girls were talking with each other. I looked up at the second floor of the hotel that had an open balcony or hallway and saw this shadowy figure that was the perfect shape of a man standing there looking down at us. I could make out the shape of a head, shoulders, and arms. In that instant, I pointed at it out to my bud and told him we should scare the girls. I think I had assumed it was a shadow or of a person against some kind of light, but when they looked up, they said, "What are you talking about? There's nothing there." I turned and it was gone. I realized that it was way too dark and perfect of a shape to have been a person's shadow. Also, it didn't make sense because it was night and there was no light facing the direction that would have made that a possibility. There also wasn't anyone up there and on the ground near us. Didn't hear a sound of a door open or close either. Me and my bud were the ones who ended up spooked that night. I googled the hotel after and found out that it is a famously haunted location. There have been a few ghost hunting shows that have been there. Apparently the ghosts are friendly though. My granddad passed away in 2018 and I was visiting my nan's house on the 1-year anniversary of his death. In the middle of the night I woke up facing towards the wall and I saw a figure kneeling down by the edge of the bed which looked exactly like him. I completely froze after I saw him. About 2 seconds later, the figure stood up and walked out the door. His passing was the first time I'd experienced losing someone close to me, so he was probably just making sure I was doing okay. To this day, I'm not 100% sure what happened, but it stuck with me. My grandmother passed away from cancer 2 years before I was born, and my grandfather had a room where he kept all her things such as jewelry, pictures, her china, and crystal collection, etc. I moved abroad at quite a young age, but would stay with my grandfather when we visited, and my brother and I would always be given her room to sleep in during our visit. It's hard to explain really, but I always felt there was something lightly off in that room. I didn't mind sleeping there, but also I didn't hang out in that room much during the day, even when I was much younger. Before we moved abroad to the room wasn't one I would play in. I always played in the room directly next to it. Fast forward to when I was 10 years old and visiting my grandpa, staying in the room as normal. The room was super dark at night, as my grandpa has these super blackout blinds and no light gets in. I woke up in the middle of the night and I could see this floating figure at the end of my bed. What I saw I can only describe as this very white glowing thing. As I said, there was no light in that room at night, but this thing was a bright white light. It looked like it was or was draped in this white see-through stuff which floated as if the wind was blowing inside the room. It just stood there for a moment. It wasn't terrifying looking at all. The thing, it was almost calming. For a 10-year-old to see something like that did freak me out, and I hid under the covers until I fell asleep. I still think about this all the time. Like I said, I don't know what it is I saw. I like to think it was my grandmother, since it was her room, but who knows? I've never been able to really rationalize what I saw. I haven't slept or spent more than 5 minutes in that room ever since. It's been 17 years.